Welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable. We are talking about dialogue. So, easy to define. It's when your characters talk. It's the text you put inside quotation marks and add some kind of a tag to. So, how about problems with dialogue? Any you've noticed or any that you have when you're writing?
Dialogue that doesn't sound like people talking.
Okay, yeah, let's start there. So in what way does the dialogue not sound like people talking? Because that could go different directions.
I tend to do, like, if I haven't read it out loud, then sometimes it sounds really stilted or like something that no one in their right mind would ever say, or like they're narrating something that they shouldn't be saying. It's anything that comes across as something that no person in that situation would actually have come out of their mouth.
Mm-hmm. Here's one for you, yes. Gabrielle, why did you take the oranges out of the top left-hand side of the fridge and put them on the right-hand side of the kitchen bench just above the bin? Hey, who took the oranges out of the fridge? You know?
Right, exactly.
Right. Well, that would be a case of the writer trying to have the dialogue do too much. So something that should have been in narrative showing a character taking action was instead put in dialogue. So there's a good don't for people to remember.
You know, Alida, that your brother-in-law, you know the one who's the medical doctor who had that emergency last year that went into the hospital, Alida? Oh, my goodness, Alida. And Kathryn would know all about that because, Kathryn, you were speaking to Alida at the time when you were parked in your red car outside that hospital.
Yes. Oh, I hate it when people do that. Yeah, so saying things... Yeah, saying things in dialogue that is clearly for the reader and not for the character. That is another big don't, which is what you just gave us a beautiful example of, is trying to explain something to the reader, that the characters already know, that would never have to be explained for them. So that needs to go into a bit of narrative exposition or come out some other way, but definitely not in dialogue.
And when I was doing my very first book, I realized that as I was going through revision, probably number 12 or something ridiculous, and I suddenly thought, because you do, after a while you realize, hey, what if I read out the dialogue? Hey, would that be a good idea? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. And you read it out and you realize they're all saying each other's name for almost every other thing. And you think, what the hell? Who does that? You just don't do it.
Right. Nobody does that. Yeah, so overusing people's names. I hope that our listeners and viewers are taking notes here. Okay, do not overuse characters' names in dialogue. Do not explain things to the reader in dialogue. Yes, the other thing is a lack of contractions. So verbally, we contract things all the time. So if you're writing stuff into quotation marks, use contractions. That's part of making it sound natural. The only exception would be if you've got a character who does not use contractions for some reason, and then that becomes part of that character's characterization. It's almost like a character tag, but you can't have everyone doing that unless they're all, like it's the culture. So
that's what I loved about the remake of True Grit. I know it's a movie example, but
I was just thinking of that.
The dialogue is sensational because there are no contractions. Mm-hmm. I cannot see him doing that. It's amazing. It really does lend a feel to it that's very different. You don't quite realize what it is at first.
Right. Well, and I think that Rooster Cogburn probably used contractions because he was such gritty, dirty, kind of low down character. Mm-hmm. He was a gunslinger and an alcoholic, and he was, I think when Maddie found him, he was in an outhouse behind the saloon or something, Yeah, but I actually heard a interview when that movie came out, and they were talking about the way Maddie speaks and how articulate and formal her speech sounded. Even though she was such a young character, And the interviewee, the authority, was saying that Maddie would have been raised on the Bible, and in that time period, that was completely plausible because her education would have come from that structure. So that syntax, that lack of contractions, really worked for her.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which raises just such a great point that when you develop your character and you're thinking about things like setting and education and religion and all of those contextual pieces, those do need to factor into our dialogue and how that character sounds, which is part of making one character distinct from another, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the other trick is if you're trying to make them distinct and you're doing it also by accent or regional accent, then that's a really fine line to have to draw, isn't it? Where if you're trying to use phonetics, then you can put the reader off a lot.
Right.
But dripping the odd one in here and then, or the odd word,
mm-hmm.
Do you ken, or something
mm-hmm.
like that. That implies, I think, is really skillful and also hard to do. I'm having a book made into an audio book at the moment, and one of the publishers has been great because they asked me, how do you pronounce all these names? Are there any accents in there that you have in your head? So I actually had to think even more than when I was writing about how mm-hmm. these accents, how these people are going to sound, and because it's science fiction and some of them come from planets where the accent is established, but who knows what it is. So I've had to make it, this has probably got elements of a Russian sounding, and this one's mm-hmm. where it's a mafia ruled planet, so probably going to have an Italian type base. So it's really interesting.
Those Italian mafia are everywhere.
Ganymede.
How did they get there?
It's full of them.
Yeah. Yes. And the book title is?
Oh yeah, book title.
What's your book called?
Robert.
Well, if you want to
we
go
just
and read
stumped
something,
Robert.
go and read something for free, then read a barroom brawl on Ganymede, and I'll give you the Insta freebie link for it. Because that's
awesome. Okay.
Yeah, that's a starting place for the mafia. But it is interesting,
cool.
though, isn't it? When
that'll be in the show notes. Yeah. So
that's it. It's got a tattoo parlor and everything. So how does a guy who runs a tattoo parlor on Ganymede, how does he speak?
Right. That brings up a couple of really great points, because you mentioned phonetics, and you really can't do that much
over and over
and get away with it, because it becomes irritating to read, especially when the contractions are unusual, they're irregular. And so then the reader has to try to kind of guess at what you mean by the pronunciation or try to find the rhythm of that. And it might not be as natural in their head as it is in your head. I see this a lot in science fiction manuscripts when words are being made up, and especially if there are lots of hard consonants and like X's and Y's and L's and Z's. And it's like, so you end up not reading those words like in your head. You just register them visually.
Register them.
But you don't read them. Yeah. But it creates kind of a linguistic disconnect between the reader and the text, because there's a piece that you cannot pronounce. You cannot connect with it on that level.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. I think it's important when you do it. That's another topic, though, isn't it? But it is a bit of dialogue, because if somebody's speaking, it's time for us to go to the. As a reader, what? It's just not going to work. And so designing those things so they can be spoken, I think, is important within dialogue as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget my dad reading us the Redwall series out loud. Have you guys read Redwall or any of the stories around there? It's all animals talking, and they all have different dialects. And so my dad reading mole speech out loud and stuff like that. And they have
cool.
little ticks and things like that sticks in my brain because it was well done enough that you could read it. But then there would be little things that would come through or follow through the different animals that you could tell which animal was speaking. But he could do it out loud, reading it from the book, which
that's probably the test,
cool.
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
If it can be done out loud. Because there are some pretty famous books where there is a lot of phonetics in them. It's probably not a modern style, but aren't things like Huckleberry Finn and those sort of things got lots of phonetic implied dialogue? That's probably why I find them hard to read nowadays.
Yeah, I'd have to go look at that, but I imagine there is, but it also would have been much more familiar to Mark Twain's readers.
True.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you're writing, y'all can't do that, that's going to be a lot different than, you know, like your science fiction example, which I won't try to duplicate. You know,
yeah.
But
g'day, like it is a drinking down here, you know.
Right, like you could write that phonetically, and just like watching a movie in a foreign dialect of English, you can tune into it. So it might take you a chapter or two, but you can get the rhythm of it and tune into it just like your ears tune into it. And then it becomes perfectly fine, you know?
So that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because as writers, you write dialogue as words, but actually we also need to think of dialogue as sound.
Yes, we do. Yeah, like Kathryn was saying about her dad reading aloud, I think to go back to that test of whether or not it works is don't read it yourself because you invented it. So of course you can do it. Hand it to your friends and say, okay, read this, and see how much they stumble over it and how hard it is for them. And if it's doable, it'll probably work visually for your audience. But yeah, avoid putting crazy difficult phonetics in front of people.
Another good thing, and not saying don't do what you just said, but another addition to that as well that can help cover in any other gaps that humans tend to gloss over. Use a voice reader, text to voice. I use an iOS app called Voice Dream, which has very lifelike reading, and you can choose accents. You can choose English, you can choose Indian, you can choose American, you can choose Australian even, and it's really helpful. So I do speed it up, so it takes only probably about 5 or 6 hours to get through, say an 80,000 word text, and the most you can do at any one time is about an hour. Otherwise, you go kind of
right.
But it's really handy because you can hear straight away when dialogue is stilted. It just doesn't come out right. So even when it's been read with a computer voice, you know that the sentence construction just isn't right, and so that's helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What about tags and action beats, between sentences when people are speaking, or too much tagging, or said, she said, she said, he said.
Right. I just did. Yeah, I just did a tip on that called broken breaks, where I've seen quite a bit where people put the breaks in the wrong places between the dialogue tags and the character. So it's like, don't touch that, John said. Carol put it down, and then there's the paragraph break. I was only looking, Carol said. And so, so that's one issue with that is, because you need to separate, you need to keep like with like. So John said, paragraph break, Carol put it down, then Carol's dialogue, and she said. So you should look at it. It should make sense visually to someone who's outside of your head. So if you have two characters and the structure is A, B, A, B, A, B, you only need a dialogue tag every third or fourth line, just to kind of remind us of where we're at. If you've got like two men and a woman in the room, you're going to have to really watch the men, because he said, it refers to two different people. So then you've got to be a little more meticulous about where you use names or actions as opposed to just the simple, invisible he said, she said. And then for variety, you don't want to change said into 50 different things because that becomes very tedious. He described, he coughed, he whatever. Just stick with said. Its invisibility is actually a good thing. But to reduce the number of that, use action tags instead of the dialogue. So like, don't touch that, John said. Carol put the screwdriver down. Geez, I was just looking. right? So Carol putting it down, that's the action tag. Then you can eliminate the she said.
Signifies,
Right.
Yeah. So did that make sense? I just kind of like rolled through that pretty quickly, but
yeah, and with the said thing, that invisibility is so important because it is so glaringly obvious when you get an author who you're reading and all of a sudden everything is tagged with like an almost annoying description of how they're talking. And sometimes like that will just pull me straight out of the story because I'm like, I already got that she was angry. I didn't need shouted angrily after that, because it tends to get out of hand. As soon as you start using different words than said, then you start wanting to add modifiers to what they're, and then you start rolls and rolls and rolls, and then you end up with this massive headache of a dialogue tag.
And also I'd say that's probably okay in first draft. So, because sometimes you can't think, what's my action beat here, or what's my sentence structure in the dialogue that's going to imply that they're really angry. Oh, stuff it. I'm just going to say he said angrily and I'll fix it, in post. And interestingly as well, you see, like J.K. Rowling, for example, a lot of her dialogue tags are Swifties. So if anybody doesn't know the Tom Swiftie thing, go and search for Tom Swiftie dialogue, because everybody said something with an adverb on the end. He said haughtily. She spoke angrily. So it's really fun especially for new writers, to see where they can find that in their own text. But then you can read very successful books like the Harry Potter series where it is in there, and if you become a writer and get well established, you might find it after a while, because as you get used to revising and editing your own work and you see it in others, you think, oh, this book should never have sold millions, honestly.
Or it should have, but for a very different reason. Not for those dialogue tags.
Right.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder how much better it might have been if you could have even addressed that.
Right. Well, and if you find yourself using those adverbs in your dialogue tags, look at the actual dialogue. What is the character speaking? Because you could say, go stuff yourself, she said angrily, or go stuff yourself. Like, find that was a bad example. Find the words that express what the character is feeling. So, okay, here's a good example. You should leave now, she said angrily, or go stuff yourself. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
There. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So look at the actual words instead of the adverb. And then also look for those action tags, the movements the character is going to make, the gestures, the facial expressions. And if it's your point of view character, the physicality, embody that character. So is the fist clenching, is the heart pumping, or the cheeks flushing, whatever that emotion is. So all of those are ways to get around really repetitive, really repetitive and redundant, let's just say, overuse of dialogue tags, right?
Yes. And also on modifiers, as I understand it, some modifiers are okay where there is no other verb. So he said softly is probably perfectly fine if you don't overuse it.
Right.
Because you could say she whispered, I suppose, from time to time as well. But it's better to do that than. But you could also say, she said in a quiet voice.
Right. Well, and all of those examples are describing a moderation of the voice, a vocal moderation. It's how the sound came out as opposed to the character's feeling or action, right? So it's great when it works to say how a sound is made, like quietly.
When it modifies the verb as opposed to explaining the voice.
Right. Like if you have to shout across a room to get someone's attention, that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
And that's different from like shouting in anger where you want to look at the words and the gestures and the emotions.
And let's be fair as well. If we tried to operate this podcast in a growl, nobody would actually understand us. So you can't growl words.
Right.
So that whole thing of, you're just not in it for the money, are you? He growled. Okay, well, try growling that. It really irritates me. I know some people don't care, but it irritates the living daylights out of me.
Yes.
I don't like it.
And my pet peeve is hissing. Everybody hisses. And you cannot hiss a word unless it has S's in it. Because hiss is an onomatopoeia. It is a word that sounds like what it is. So you can't say, get out of here, he hissed. It's impossible. There are no S's in that sentence, so stop using hiss and growl unless that is what the character actually is doing.
But that's right. Yes, the dog growled. Okay, that's fine.
Yes, right. Unless your character's speech sounds like it can't be a growl.
And then he could growl or say something and then hiss. But probably
yes, and then that's right. Yes, if it's a sound they're
yes.
making. Yeah, exactly. Is this the snobby episode, by the way? I think it is.
No, I think we're just clearing a couple of pet peeves here. Maybe a few.
I'll tell you, I will own up. My characters nod and shrug like it's going out of fashion. And, so if I don't want to do a he said or a she said, they're always nodding, shrugging. And then I think in the early days, I used to always have them sipping drinks or looking out of windows.
Oh, yeah. Yes, coffee is, yeah. Yeah, when I was in high school.
If you can make your action work to be, and again, I'll use the Dresden Files because I think he's an absolute master of the dialogue beats being very, very relevant. Let me think about this. I asked Susan if she'd seen my blasting rod. I patted down my duster. It wasn't there. Hey, have you got it over there? So, the action beat, I patted down my duster, is an action beat, but it's completely irrelevant to what he's just in the middle of doing. So I think, you look for ways to continue the story in your action beats and don't just have nods and shrugs and sips of coffee just because you want to interrupt.
Right. Definitely. When I was in high school, I had a teacher point out that all of my characters were smoking cigarettes. I was like, and I didn't smoke. I just didn't know, that was what people did with their hands, I thought. And I didn't know what else to have them do with their hands. So there were matches to light and lighters and packs and things to do with your hands. So that's what they did between lines of dialogue. And once it was pointed out to me, I broke that habit.
You quit.
I quit. Yes, my characters all quit smoking. Yeah. Now, it's good to remind everybody that when you're writing a scene of dialogue, you do need action to break stuff up if you don't want it to read like a script, like a screenplay. But that action needs to help carry the scene. It needs to be organic, just like in real life. Our movements are organic, and that could be as simple as shifting on the seat of your chair, shifting your weight around, or cleaning dirt out from under your fingernails, or whatever this character would do, twirling an earring. It doesn't have to be a big movement to just break up the dialogue and present that little bit of characterization to the reader, We're nodding. We're nodding again.
I think the folks on audio know there that we're just so agreeable.
We are, yes. Deep thoughts. Let's all nod.
And everyone nodded.
Yes. So
there you go.
Dialogue.
Yeah.
She said. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up this dialogue. Any final thoughts? Final words of wisdom? All right. With that, thank you so much for joining us at this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our episodes and show notes at storyworkspodcast.com.
We'll do that for the opening thing.
All right, do it. Let's go. Ready? Air quotes.